Dr. Frances Welsing, give us the benefit of your theory, please.
Well, my theory was, I wrote the paper in 1969. I wrote a paper called The Crest Theory of Color Confrontation and Racism. And the sole reason behind writing that paper was an attempt to understand the behavior of white people in relationship to all people of color, every place in the world, black, brown, red, and yellow people. And the paper was presented to the Americans at the National Medical Association, the section on psychiatry in neurology, because back in 1969, the Black Caucus in the American Psychiatric Association, we had said that racism, and when we talk about racism, we're talking about the white supremacy behavior of white people. That racism was the #1 mental health problem in the nation, and it was the #1 cause of other mental health problems. And I wanted to understand what this thing of racism really is all about, because it's the thing that has caused woe and misery and suffering for the vast majority of the people on this planet that are classified as non-white. And in my attempt to understand why the necessity of white people to keep saying that white is superior and that the condition of non-white is inferior, and the more I thought about it, in conjunction with an idea that a friend of mine had, that racism was a worldwide behavioral system for the maintenance of white supremacy by a small minority of people. I put those ideas together with what we know about genetics, what we know about the condition of skin whiteness itself. The condition of skin whiteness is the genetic inability to produce skin pigment called melanin. This is a genetic recessive trait. It is a genetic deficiency state, not as defined by Frances Welsing, but defined by geneticists and dermatologists, that the inability to produce the skin pigment of melanin or melanin pigment is described as albinism. And I think that white people, even though most white people are not consciously understanding their problem in genetics, they are certainly aware that they are genetically dominated by people of color. That's why it was a statement, one drop of black blood makes you black, because people of color have the genetic capacity to annihilate white people. And so unless white people control the reproductivity of people of color, then we can postulate that perhaps one day there won't be any white people. And I think that the very survival of white people necessitates that they project genetic inferiority on people of color, because it is they who really are aware that they are genetic recessive and perhaps genetically inferior to people of color. And I am not saying this to call the condition of skin whiteness to say, well, no, white people are inferior. I'm not saying it for that purpose, but I think that it is of prime importance for the majority of people in the world to understand why it is that white people have to, the effective majority, large numbers of white people, have to move in a hostile and an aggressive way against people of color, and have to constantly focus on it's you who's genetically inferior, because they realize that there's something wrong with their genetic status. Now,
one of the things that Charles Darwin told us was that man was not man as we see him today. What Darwin basically means is that I was once a single cell like amoeba, and then I went ahead through many years, millions of years, to become who I am today. So according to Darwin, organisms passed through 4 stages of evolution: natural selection, mutation, isolation, and the last one was adaptation. Adaptation was the most critical stage for the evolution of beings. Many organisms, such as the mammoths, such as the dragons, and such as the dinosaurs, would not reach this stage of adaptation. Only the organisms that were able to adapt are the organisms that survived. I don't say that I believe in what Charles Darwin said, but there are things that he said which we can use them to critique and to analyze specific occurrences that happen within our space. Across Western nations, a growing narrative has taken root that the white population is quickly declining, and that this demographic shift represents a crisis requiring intermediate action. This narrative is often called, or it's often referred to as, the Great Replacement Theory. It has been echoed in political speeches, media discourse, and extremist movement. Yet, beneath its statistical surface lies a deeper psychological and sociological anxiety. Dr. Frances Cress Welsing anticipated and profoundly dissected in her groundbreaking work, The ISIS Papers, The Keys to the Colors. This book was established in 1991. So Dr. Frances Cress Welsing directly spoke about this many years ago. So it's like she was ahead of her time, and she prophesied about this very ideology. I want us to dive into a video that is going to be in support of this specific argument that we are going to discuss about the declining of the white population. Is it adaptation, that they can't adapt to the changing environment, or what's happening? We are yet to find out the answer. So let's dive into this video, watch it. I shall get back by the end of it, of course, where we shall also have a deep critical analysis.
The Moors went into Europe, they changed the appearance of the population. Do you see? So you have Italians, Spaniards being darker than the Scandinavians. A Scandinavian person told me that they never considered the Italians or Jewish people to be white. Do you see? Because the lighter people are further.
All right, so look, America drapes itself in symbols like armor, the flag, the eagle, the uniforms, the wall. It claims that these are signs of strength, but Dr. Frances Cress Welsing gave us the lens to see the truth. These are not symbols of supremacy. They are symbols of survival. Not genetic dominance, but genetic panic. Before I get into this, let me go ahead and leave my TikTok disclaimer. This is for entertainment purposes only. I'm tired of getting violations on my videos. But anyways, let's get back to it. White supremacy at its core is not an expression of power. It's the architecture of insecurity for a people who know deep in their cells that they cannot biologically sustain themselves in a world full of color, in a world full of melanin. That subconscious awareness, that fear of genetic annihilation, leaks out everywhere in the culture, in the American culture. You see it in the American flag. 13 stripes for colonies that legalized slavery. 50 stars for territories claimed, occupied, or stolen. Welsing would tell you this is not just patriotism. It's a constant reminder to the white psyche of the territorial control required to hold back the tide. The flag is a talisman against disappearance. You see it in the bald eagle, especially the bald eagle, a solitary predator with a fixed, piercing gaze. The eye isn't noble. It's scanning, watching, and anticipating threats that may not even exist yet. And Welsing taught that fear is the most dangerous when it's preemptive. And the eagle symbolism is not peace, it's preemptive defense. It's a symbol of the subconscious mind of a people who can't rest. You see it in the border wall, a monument to demographic anxiety. If your population was really secure, you wouldn't spend millions on concrete and barbed wire to keep people out. But Welsing's theory explains why that is necessary to them. Every brown body that crosses that line is seen as a drop in the pool that could potentially dissolve the myth of whiteness itself. You see it in police militarization, armored vehicles in small towns. They got riot gear for protest. They even carry assault rifles for traffic stops. This is not about law enforcement efficiency. It's a uniformed performance of dominance. Welsing would say it's the psychology of a people who must constantly remind the darker people of who's in charge. Without those constant reminders, then the illusion might fade. Even the Pledge of Allegiance becomes a tool in this architecture. Every morning, children face the flag and recite the oath. It's a ritual binding the next generation to this symbol. In occult mechanics, repetition is enchantment. And Welsing's work shows us why this enchantment is necessary. Because the system's legitimacy is not self-evident. It must be recharged daily. Then there's the all-seeing eye on top of the pyramid on the Great Seal. Now, esoterically, the eye represents divine sight. But here in America, it's been co-opted into the architecture of surveillance. America's institutions must watch, must document. They must archive every move of melanated peoples. Why? Because in the white psyche, The unknown actions of the darker-skinned other carry the greatest existential threat. Welsing explained it plainly. When you are a genetic minority on the planet, you just can't afford to just sit around and watch. Not if you want to survive. This is why the prison industrial complex is not just an economic engine. It's a breeding ground for control. The jumpsuit, the cell, the tracking number. All symbols reinforcing the subconscious need to control, to regulate, to neutralize bodies capable of producing the genetic majority. Welsing's theory makes the whole thing click into place. The system isn't over-policing because it's confident. It's over-policing because it's afraid. Even the Epstein files can be read through this lens. The panic around their potential release isn't just about political embarrassment. It's the fear that these hidden truths could dismantle the entire social structure. Welsing told us that once the facade cracks, then the symbols lose their magic. A talisman exposed as a fraud stops working. From an occult perspective, this architecture is brittle because it's built on inversion. The symbols present themselves as power, but they're actually more like protective charms against psychic extinction. The empire is a massive ritual circle. The monuments, the flags, the uniforms, the chants, all working to keep the fear from fully surfacing within the white consciousness. But here's the prophecy. The more the sun burns hotter, the more the earth changes. The more the melanated presence rises in numbers and awareness, the more the architecture will rattle. The fear that has been hidden within the subconscious mind will soon manifest itself as open aggression. You will see more walls, more police, more surveillance, more desperate shows of force. But you gotta remember, it's not because they're winning. It's because they're losing. Dr. Francis Cress Welsing gave us the key to decode this entire spectacle. Supremacy is the mask. Insecurity is the face. Once you see the face clearly, the symbols lose their power. The symbols lose their spell. And that's when the architecture of insecurity stops being a fortress and becomes
the single greatest threat to America right now is white supremacy. And we need to stop acting like it's black people or brown people or immigrants. The average empire lasts 250 years, and let's fucking face it, America is an empire. It's a series of states and territories controlled under a single president or authority. Yes, we have checks and balances. Yes, we have our other system. But the point being, America is on the verge of collapse. And it's because it was built on a system that was never meant to sustain it. It was built on forced labor, kidnapping, violence to maintain the social order. If we want to improve what we have and actually preserve the country that we have, we need to literally completely eradicate white supremacy. As an ideology, it is so dangerous, so harmful, and that is where so many hate crimes stem from. The craziest thing is even realizing how many mass shootings and other mass acts of violence stem from white supremacy and hatred. That's why it irritates me how many politicians on the right, and honestly liberal politicians, are like, we need to be tough on crime, we need to be tough on crime. This is an ideology issue. This is an education issue, and it's the result of a system that allows white people to act however they want without consequence. And we need to start treating white supremacy like the real fucking threat that it is.
White people, let's talk about it. Let's talk about our violence. White violence. No more deflecting, no more blaming everything on everybody else. Let's confront ourselves. White people in America, our history is so extremely violent. And instead of confronting that, we continue to blame other people for the issues and the problems in this country, instead of just taking ownership of our part to play in everything, which is a huge part. Can we stop scapegoating other groups of people, please, and just look at ourselves? White people, it's time to talk about it. Like, it's long past time. Getting rid of other groups of people in this country is not going to make this country better. It's not going to make your life better. It's not going to make you better. I think white people are so scared to talk about race and to talk about white violence and white supremacy because they don't want to connect themselves to it. We don't want to feel like we're a part of the problem. But unless you're acknowledging the reality of how the US, this country, runs, you are a part of the problem. I truly believe in my heart, in my soul, that if you're born a white person in this country or on this planet, but I'll just speak about this country, part of that journey is to dismantle systems that have been built to oppress other people. The hard work of life is to confront yourself. how do I benefit from the way that things are? And how does my benefiting from those things harm other people? And instead of walking around with, 1,000-pound bag of shame on your back, consider it your responsibility to do that work. Consider it an opportunity that you are in the best possible position to make this world a better place by not accepting racist and prejudiced and oppressive systems for what they are and trying to contribute to changing them. Use the privilege that you have for good. I don't think that anybody can ever really love themselves without being honest about themselves, without being honest with themselves. And that work is painful and hard, but it's so worth it. White people, you don't have to consciously think that you're better than other people in order to contribute to harm against them. All it takes to contribute to harm is to stay silent and disengaged. White people, can we finally get this shit right? Can we finally take accountability? Can we finally look ourselves in the mirror and decide that this isn't good enough? We're not doing a good enough job. You aren't losing because somebody else is safe and cared for. You aren't losing because somebody different than you exists. White people, let's talk about it. Let's start having these conversations with ourselves and with each other.
Why would whites seek to establish a system of white supremacy? When they moved out of Europe, circled around the globe and found out, wow, well, there are very few people like ourselves who have this inability to produce color. And they had a psychological reaction to, number one, the fact that they were a numerical minority, and number two, on the basis that they did not have the capacity to produce color, as the vast majority of the people in the world did. And they felt color deficient, numerically deficient and color deficient. Now, one way that they could psychologically compensate for this sense of genetic inadequacy and numerical deficiency would be to say, well, I really don't like the fact that I can't produce color, but if I can make the people who have color believe that they're the ugly people and feel that they are degraded, then I can feel good.
Click the link in the bio to get the book.
So, after watching this video, here is my deep, critical analysis. Dr. Francis Cress-Welsing, a psychiatrist, a scholar, argued that global white supremacy was not merely a political or economic system. It was but a psychological one, rooted in the collective fear of genetic annihilation. Dr. Francis Cress-Welsing theorized that white supremacy, historical violence from colonization to segregation, stemmed from the insecurity of being a global minority. In her view, whiteness as an identity was constructed and defended precisely because of its fragility. The current discourse surrounding white demographic decline can therefore be read as a modern manifestation of the same anxiety Dr. Francis Cress-Welsing identified decades ago. In Europe, North America, and Australia, reports, or rather the media reports, frequently highlighting falling birth rates among the white population, alongside the rising proportions of non-white and immigrant communities. These statistics are often framed not as neutral demographic facts, but as warnings, as if cultural or racial extinction were imminent. This framing in itself reveals the ideological weight behind the numbers. To some, a shrinking white majority signifies the loss of political dominance, cultural influence, or even existential relevance. Dr. Francis Cress-Welsing analysis helps decode this reaction. She wrote that white supremacy persistence depended on maintaining systems that secure white genetic survival and dominance. If one accepts that framework, then the panic over declining white population is less about demographic and more about the perceived loss of control. The fear is not of extinction. The fear is not of extinction in a biological sense, but of equality, of no longer being able to define the terms of existence for others. So, through this, we discover that there is a fear of there is a politics of fear and preservation. You see, politicians who invoke the decline of the West or the need to preserve European heritage often mask this with racial fear in cultural language. They speak of protecting tradition or securing borders, but as Dr. Welsing pointed out, cultural preservation is frequently used as a code for racial preservation. The obsession with controlling immigrations, women's reproduction, or interracial unions reflects, in her words, a desperate attempt to avoid a genetic and a psychological annihilation. Now, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing also proposed that racism in itself is a global strategy, conscious or unconscious, to ensure white genetic survival by maintaining separation and dominance over dark-skinned people. When viewed through that lens, the so-called need to act in response to white population decline is not about protecting civilization, but about protecting privilege. It is an emotional reaction disguised as a political one, a fear of losing inherited advantages in a world that is becoming more multiracial and more interconnected. Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's psychoanalytic perspective invites us to look beyond policy debates and examine the inner world of racial consciousness. She argues that whiteness as a social identity is built on negation, defining itself by what it is not. Therefore, when whiteness is confronted with the rise of non-white population or cultures, it experiences existential instability. The declining birth rates are not just numbers, they are symbols of vulnerability. This psychological dimension explains why the demographic shift is often discussed in alarmist tones, even though many of these societies continue to enjoy vast economic and institutional power. The fear, then, is not a rational one, but symbolic. It is the fear of losing the myth of supremacy, the illusion that whiteness is the natural center of humanity. So, there's this thing that I call reframing humanity beyond fear. In contrast to this fear-based worldview, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing envisioned the possibility of a new human order, one based on justice rather than domination. She believed that understanding the psychology of white fear was essential for dismantling racism, because only then could humanity address the insecurities that sustain it. The current demographic changes could in fact be seen not as a crisis, but as a natural evolution towards a more blended and interconnected human family. Yet this perspective requires courage, the courage to let go of hierarchy and to see diversity not as a threat, but as the next chapter in the human story. To conclude, the narrative of white population decline reveals more about the psychology of those who fear it than about the reality of demographic change itself. Through Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's perspective, this anxiety is a continuation of the centuries-old struggle of whiteness to maintain control in a world that no longer guarantees it. It is, at its core, a fear of equality, of the end of racial dominance. As population mix and societies diversify, the question is not how to preserve whiteness, but how to preserve justice. Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's work challenges humanity to outgrow the need for racial hierarchies and to recognize that the survival of the human species depends not on separation but on mutual respect and understanding. The true crisis, therefore, is not demographic. It is moral and psychological. And until that is confronted, the fear of the decline will continue to echo through the chambers of history. Yes. This is a reinforcement to the statements of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing when she talks about the reasons for racism, the reasons why people have to reinforce ideologies of white supremacy and white privilege. Dr. Frances Cress Welsing does very, very beautiful work. I highly propose that if you find some time, go online and search, read her books, watch her videos. She has a very, very interesting, non-provocative arguments, right? Yes, I hope that we've gained value from all this. If you have, share your thoughts on the comment section. I'd really love to know what you think about my works and the videos in general, right? Yeah. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Support me on Patreon if you may. I'll really appreciate